I'm Benji Fisher. Before we get started, I did that, yay. I've already written a blog post on what I'm talking about today. We can come back to the URL if you need it later. And soon I'll get the slides up where you can access them. So a little about me. I've been on Drupal.org since 2010. So in less than a year, I'll have my 10-year Drupalversary, and I'm at Benji Fisher there. I have the same handle on GitHub and GitLab. But I was slow to sign up for Twitter, so there I'm Benji17 Fisher. And the yellow pig is the avatar I use on most social media, and that's why I wear this hat, because I might sometimes run into people who know me from online and might recognize my avatar, and so this is a yellow pig hat. And since we're in beautiful Amherst, Massachusetts, I should mention the local connection. Since 1971, at the southern end of the town, at Hampshire College, there's a summer math program for high school students. And I went there when I was in high school, and I've been back there to teach a few times. And that program is run by David Kelly. We all call him just Kelly. And he introduced us to the mysteries of the yellow pig and the number 17. So yeah, that's. I'm surprised that no one around here seems to be aware of that. At least no one at this conference. I work for Isovera. We're a small company just outside of Boston. We do strategy and design. We do development and training. Almost 100% Drupal. So let me start by describing the problem that I'm trying to solve here. That the book navigation for a site I was working on needs to be cached. So here our client was Pega Systems, and they have a ton of technical documentation. And if you're actually interested in what Pega does, you'd be interested in that content section over on the right, the main body of the page. But for this talk, I'm most interested in this stuff in the left sidebar. That's a huge menu of the pages in this book, the pages in this technical documentation. And I hope you can see they're sort of nested several levels deep. And you click on the little arrow icons and you expand the section of the menu underneath that, and I've done that. And if you look really closely, you might see near the bottom of the navigation, one of the links is in boldface that says Settings tab of the section form, which is also the title of the content for this page. So the link for the current page is in boldface, and more importantly, this large menu is expanded out enough to show that item, show its neighbors and its parents. So how bad is this problem? There are over 4,000 pages in this book. When you render the menu as HTML, just a bunch of unordered links and, a bunch of links and unordered lists, it comes out to 2.7 megabytes, which is twice as big as it should be because there's one copy for mobile and one copy for desktop. And since I made this slide, we actually fixed that problem. So now it's only 1.3 megabytes of menu navigation on the page, which is much larger than the actual content on the page. And furthermore, figuring out how to render that is expensive. If you have to go back to Drupal and PHP and process these menus, it takes a long time. It actually takes 40 to 50 seconds for the first time you load one of these pages. That's unacceptable. After some previous work I did to improve the caching, I got it down to 6 to 9 seconds just to reload the page. And that's still pretty terrible. And after the work that I did, that I'm describing here, the cached page loads in 2 to 3 seconds. Now, that's not good. I feel kind of strange bragging about, oh, my page loads in only 2 to 3 seconds. But I think it's certainly not good. I think it's fair, but at least it's not deadly. So, okay, so we're making progress here. We've gone from unacceptable to fair. That's as much as I claim. And the strategy to do this, first you have to use the same navigation on all pages. So the bit about opening up the navigation to show the link to the current page, that has to be done client-side with JavaScript, which is not hard, but you have to do it. And then once you've got the same navigation on each of those pages, you have to have a caching strategy so that that 1.3 megabytes gets cached once for the whole book and then used on every page of the book. So before I race on to the technical details, any questions about the problem I'm trying to solve here?
Maybe one.
Yeah.
There was an explicit requirement that the whole navigation should be loaded at once instead of maybe just rendering a subset of it and then utilizing Ajax to load the missing bits.
Okay, the question is it an explicit requirement that the page navigation load all at once? Maybe we could use Ajax or something to load it in the background after the main page is loaded. That is not an explicit requirement, and that would probably be an improvement. We could have some sort of short form of the page navigation that loads immediately, and then in the background replace that with the full navigation. That would be more complicated than what I'm doing here. Drupal supports that sort of thing with the Big Pipe module, and a few years ago, I think it was DrupalCon Los Angeles, there weren't a lot of good sessions, but there was one that really knocked my socks off, and that was the session on the Big Pipe module. So yeah, that would be further work that might actually get us down to a good page load time rather than just fair. So let me say a few words about internal versus external cache and show off my great graphic design skills. Caching is one of the things that Drupal does really well, especially the current version of Drupal, Drupal 8. So an internal cache is where Drupal stores the bits and pieces of a page, for example, the page navigation that we're talking about here. So Drupal has a back-end cache, that's the little database symbol. Luckily I found openclipart.com or something like that. It says, our clipart is free, don't bother asking us. Just use it. So Drupal computes these pieces of the page, and sometimes they're PHP objects that it stores in the cache, or sometimes it's rendered HTML, whatever it is, it stores it in the cache. And that's different from an external cache, something like Varnish or a content delivery network, where Drupal generates the whole page, it goes to this external system, and that sits in between Drupal and the browser, so that when you're fetching the page, if you can get a cached version, it comes much faster. It doesn't have to go back to the server and hit Drupal and PHP. For both internal and external caches, the hard part is knowing where to clear it, and I think everyone knows the old saying that there are only two hard things in computer programming: naming things, off by one errors, and cache invalidation, and we've hit one of those. Yeah. I think I'll skip this little section. We can come back to it during the Q&A if you want, but as I showed you before, I've got lots of slides. But some details of how we fit the menu into the page template. Yeah.
Are you specifically talking Drupal 8 here, or does this cover 7 as well, just to frame this?
The question is whether I'm specifically talking about Drupal 8, and yes, Drupal 8's caching is much better than what Drupal 7 does. So the things I did here, I would not have been able to do in Drupal 7.
Thank you.
So let's look a little bit at the Drupal code that makes this happen. So there are various ways you could do this. The way it's done on this site, and it was already done and working, but very slow before I started working on it. So I didn't want to rip it up and start from scratch. I started with what was there. So when Drupal is building the page, we start off with a few tests to see whether we should quit early or not. That's what, if this, then return. If that, then return. And then we get to the caching part. And this is one of the embarrassments of Drupal 8, that we're still using these so-called render arrays. Drupal 8 is supposed to be object-oriented, but this is one piece of the system that did not get an object-oriented overhaul when we came out with Drupal 8. We still have these render arrays, and the first key is basically a callback to say what function is going to be used to calculate the navigation, this part of the page. The book ID is some variable that we're going to pass to that callback as an argument, so it knows which book navigation it should render. The weight just says where it appears on the page. And then the important part for this talk is the cache subarray. And sort of the important thing here is that for to do all this really hard caching stuff, Drupal is doing the heavy lifting. All I have to do is give it a few parameters to tell it how I want to cache. And we'll look at each of these in more detail on the later slides, but it's really just 4 pieces of information that tell Drupal how I want to cache this thing. So there's some place where you sort of declare that callback that we use. Preprocess function isn't very interesting. Again, these are things we can come back to if you're curious. And they're also, those are pieces that I didn't really touch much. I said one thing I had to change is that originally the menu was expanded when the page was built. So in the markup, it had some classes attached to some list elements, or maybe the classes are attached to the links. I forget. I guess they were attached to the links themselves. So a few of these lines are things that I added. So I guess this bottom part is the part that was already there. So that's the stuff that says that if you click on one of these arrow icons in the page, it'll expand the menu underneath that. But those lines were already there. It's just this section at the top, and it's just a few lines of jQuery that I added that say, look for some selector. The important thing is context.location.pathname. So JavaScript jQuery knows what the current page is. This is the URL of the current page. Look for a link that has that as its href. And look inside the navigation section. And then I'm going to add some CSS class to that. I'll traverse the page from there up to the top of the navigation section. And as I go, I'll add some CSS classes that'll have the effect of opening up that part of the navigation. This is stuff that jQuery does really well. And it's, as you see, like 6 lines of jQuery. Pretty easy stuff. So now let's look at the caching elements. And let me explain what each of these things tells Drupal to do. The first part are the cache keys. So I give it a unique string, pdn_book_nav. That's pdn_book is the name of the module I put this code in. Hopefully, no one else is going to use the same string. So it just has to be some unique string saying, hey, this cache element belongs to me. Don't anyone else mess with it. And the other element is a number identifying which book I'm on. Again, I want to cache once per book, not once per page. I have various books, and I want to identify that this navigation belongs to this book. And a technical point, how many people do Drupal backend stuff? Okay, so most of my audience. So I could go through these technical points. If you add cache information to a render element and you don't give it a cache key, then the caching information will bubble up until it finds something that does have a cache key, which will typically be something like a block. And I emphasize this point because it's the one thing that wasn't clear to me from the documentation. So that's easy to miss. So if you just have a render element and not a block that you want to cache, you have to give it an explicit cache key. The next thing are the cache contexts. And I want to say that if someone is looking at the English or French or German version of this page, they should be cached separately. The site I'm working on is currently not multilingual, it's English only. But, that might change in the future, so you may as well throw it in while you're thinking about it. And actually, I didn't need to do that, but I'll explain that later. And then the cache tags. This is what controls the cache invalidation. So I just put in one, a string composed of the literal node : and then the book ID. So when the parent book node is updated, we will clear this cache. And I think since I prepared this slide, we actually changed this, and it took half a dozen extra lines of PHP code, maybe a dozen. But we added cache tags for every single page in the book, so that if any page in the book is changed, its title might change, and so we should really invalidate the cache. So there's a trade-off there between how often you're going to clear the cache, whether it's worth storing 4,000 cache tags to indicate that this should be cached. But for starters, I just put this cache tag based on the book ID. And then remember the internal versus external cache. What I'm talking about here is all internal cache. So we're storing this in the database or maybe in something like Redis or Memcache. But it's the same idea if you're using an external cache. So if it were an external cache, then we'd be sending some sort of purge command to Varnish saying purge anything with these cache tags, and then it would look up and it would find, oh, this page depends on this cache tag. I'll have to invalidate that. The max age is pretty simple. That's some constant defined somewhere that says, don't expire this at a particular time. Just keep it around until I say so. And then let's have a look at the database and see what the effect is of these things that I'm telling Drupal about how to cache this page. So everything is going on in one database table called cache_render. And if you ask MySQL to describe that, there's a cache ID, CID. That's the primary key. There's the data, which is a long blob, and that's going to be in this case, my entire rendered navigation, a whole big blob of HTML. There's expire. I think that's a date stamp. Int of 11 must be a date stamp. There's created, decimal of 14.3. I never actually looked at that one. There's a Boolean serialized that says, is this serialized PHP data, or is this a string literal? There are the tags. Those are the cache tags I was just talking about on the previous slide. And then there's some checksum, which again is something I haven't looked at, but it's 255 characters. So if you look at the things that I am interested in for this talk, the cache ID, the expire, created, tags, and checksum. Well, the checksum is 12. I never did figure out, or I haven't yet figured out what that means. The cache ID has that unique string that I gave it, pdn_book_nav. It has the number, that must be the number of the book I'm looking at, 704369. So it has a certain ring to it. Languages equals en, because I told it to, I gave it a cache context of languages, and cache contexts are added with these brackets. And then the theme, where is that coming from? And user permissions is some sort of MD5 or SHA-64. I guess that's a SHA-64. So I'll explain later where those came from. Those are not things that I explicitly told Drupal to do. They come from some sort of defaults. The expires -1, that's because I said cache permanent. Oh, I see. Created is a timestamp with milliseconds. That's why it's some decimal something +3. So presumably, if I had given it some other cache expiration date, it would have had that creation time and then add my cache lifetime to that and make that the expire time. At least that's what I assume. I haven't actually tried that out. And then there's some tags that I didn't specify. Config system book 704369. So I think that means that if the configuration attached to that book page changes, then it'll be invalidated. I'm not entirely sure. Here's the one that I explicitly gave it, node : 704369. And again, rendered, I don't know. And the checksum, I didn't look into, but it's there. So I guess, right, I meant to go through these slides one at a time. So here's again the cache ID. I've added some line breaks to make it easier to read. And again, the string I gave it and the book ID, and then some other stuff. The max age, -1, it's not going to expire. The cache tags. And the permission hash, right. So here's where I explain a couple of those things. Why? Where did the permissions hash come in? That was in the. Was that in the tags? No, that was not in the tags. That was in the ID. So the cache ID had these extra elements from the theme and the user permissions with that SHA-64 hash. Where does that come from? And again, since we have a lot of Drupal people here, I'll explain. That comes from the defaults, specifically sites default services.yaml. And if you look through this YAML file, you'll find renderer.config and this helpful comment, required cache contexts. So in addition to any cache contexts I specify for the render element, I also get these defaults. And they include languages : language interface. So although I thought I was being proactive in putting that in fact, Drupal was being proactive and already included as one of the defaults, so I didn't have to bother. And then there's also a default cache context for the theme. If you switch the site theme, you'll get a different cache element and user permission. So that's why these extra things, these extra contexts show up in the cache ID. So actually, I'm a little under time. If you are interested in some of those slides I skipped, we can go back and look at them. Any questions? Yeah.
The twig stuff you skipped over, just where does that fit into all of this?
So the question is about the twig stuff that I skipped over. So twig is the templating system that Drupal uses. And this is a simplified version. I also have the full version just for reference. But this is a simplified version of the twig template. And the third line from the bottom says, insert the variable tree into the twig template. And that's going to be the menu tree. And I guess to see where that comes from, it's not this. Is it that? Yeah, there's some preprocess function where I have a twig template and then I have a PHP function that processes variables for that. Again, this is something I didn't change. This was already there. But you can see it sets variables of tree equals whatever we've calculated in the previous few lines of PHP. So that's how the system fits together. We have a preprocess function that does the hard work of computing this menu tree, and then it assigns it to a variable, which then gets put into the twig template. Other questions? Yes?
I have another one again about big pipe. I think in this case it would be a really nice use case to show off maybe even also big pipe. As you said, the main point of the user is the very page, the documentation page, but the sidebar is the one is much bigger in HTML size, like bytes, amount of transfer to do, and it takes much longer to render. The sidebar, which is secondary to the user compared to the page itself.
Right. So the comment is that the Drupal BigPipe module could do a really good job here and improve the experience. That we're going through all this work to render the menu, which is not the important part of the page, the main content. And maybe I'll go back to the beginning. Show the page. What the user wants to see when the page is loaded is the main content section, and why should we slow that down just because of this menu thing? And I agree. This is a good use case for the BigPipe module. There might be some technical problems with that. If you look through Drupal's book module, you'll see some code comments saying, BigPipe isn't going to work here. I'm not entirely sure they apply here. That might just be for the default block produced by the book module, and since we're doing a render element, it might not. Yeah, that's definitely something I would be interested in doing. It's just a question of priorities for Pega, whether they're ready to do this work, or if they have, or whether the 2 to 3 seconds we've got it down to is good enough for now. But yeah, again, what the BigPipe module would do if we implemented it here is have some sort of summary navigation that it pulls in very quickly, and then the rest of the page can load along with just that summary navigation. And then after the page is loaded, we can do a separate AJAX callback and pull in the full navigation and open it up to the parent element. I agree, that would be really cool. And I hope that Pega decides that that's a priority at some point, and we can work on that. That would be fun. Any other questions?
I think it was the cache keys, or was it the cache IDs that you said bubble up if you don't actually put them on the render array? Do those also bubble up to the parent element that they're rendering in? So if you have,
Do those bubble up to the what?
do those render up to the parent that's actually rendering that item? So if you have a menu item and then in there you have a menu link and you have a cache tag or cache key on that link, does that also bubble up to the parent, to the menu that's rendering the children?
Okay, so the question is asking for clarification on the cache keys and how they're bubbling up. And I think I must have not been very clear here. So one nested structure we've got here is the HTML nested unordered lists, which go down to links. But all of that is inside this one Drupal render element. So I guess if we go up here, this callback function, booknav, or this theme function, booknav, with the book ID, calculates the entire menu. So it calculates that entire nested HTML structure. But then this whole navigation section is just one element of the page. And the way Drupal thinks about a page is it's some nested PHP array. And there's one subarray for the navigation section on the left. There's another subarray for the main content. And then you've got some top matter and some bottom matter that are other elements of this array. So it's that nested, those nested PHP arrays that I'm talking about for the cache keys. So a single cache key applies to the whole navigation, not to a particular menu item. And then whatever array contains that, which I think is the page array for PHP, that's where things would bubble up. And if we don't specify a cache key, then whatever caching information I'm saying will apply to the whole page, unless there's some intermediate place where it stops. But say the whole page. And that's not what I want to happen. I certainly don't want to say that the entire page is cached once per book. I want to say just the navigation piece is cached once per book. And different pages will have different content, but different pages will share the same navigation. Does that help clear it up?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I went through all those slides. Okay, well, I will let you out 10 minutes early. Let me just check. There are, after questions, I still have, yes. Don't forget the feedback, nerds.ngo/feedback, and there's a little screenshot of what the feedback form looks like. And you can either give feedback for the whole Nerd Summit or just this session. And I'll push the red button again. Bye-bye recording.